Well, Roger, thank you, and thank you, colleagues, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I am indeed at home. Frankly, I don't often wear a necktie, but today I had to dig out my LSE tie to come back here. I used to live a stone's throw crossing the next square, in Tavistock Square, when I was a student at the LSE. And I just loved being back in London, back in Bloomsbury, and when I had this opportunity, I seized it. And so thank you for making it possible for me to be here. I enjoyed the words about my relationship with Charles Wedemeyer, and indeed I would be thrilled to be able to talk history with you in the seminar, but that will have to wait for another day. But the connections between, as Tim and I were having a brief word earlier, the connections between University of London and indeed Cambridge and the universities in the eastern United States and Pennsylvania are historical connections are very strong. But it's not history today. I'm committed to this topic, and firstly, a couple of disclaimers, because when I came a couple of days ago to put together my slides, I realized that we had said technology, pedagogies, and organizations in ODL. And quite honestly, I think what I'm most interested in myself, and I think what's likely to be of greater interest for you, professionals working within the university system. So perhaps questions about how our distance education, higher distance education, is organized will be of some interest. Hopefully a word or two about technology and pedagogy may also be, but I'm committed to that. So let me get through some words about the technology and the pedagogy in the minimum of my granted time, and see if we can get some discussion, possibly on those topics, but I suspect more likely on the topic of how we are organized and what changes are occurring or might occur for the delivery of distance education. One other disclaimer I should say is that although I've just boasted about my London and my British, and I am British by the way, regardless of how I may sound, my background, I have worked, as already said, for decades now in the United States, so I'm out of touch with developments, with contemporary developments in this country, and some of my examples will unfortunately be, or fortunately or unfortunately, be from the United States. Where to begin? Well, you can't usually go wrong if you begin by talking about the present, by looking back at some great luminary, and who better than Dewey, and for this I acknowledge Mike Sharples in a chapter I read recently, who quoted Dewey on a society which is mobile, that being the key word in the Sharples book, full of channels for distribution or change occurring anywhere, must see to it that its members are educated to personal initiative and adaptability, otherwise they'll be overwhelmed by the changes in which they're caught and whose significance or connections they do not perceive. Well, 100 years ago, the industrialized world was undergoing huge technological and social disruption. Railways and paved roads were being developed. Wireless communication was being developed, and a context of social and technological and perhaps, yes, economic disruption not too dissimilar from what we're faced now. And now, of course, the principal technical cause of disruption being the development of the internet and more recently mobile technologies. The emergence of communication on the web that Roger referred to when we were using the Rome conveners preceded the arrival of the internet and the web and the browser indeed. but it's this web-based internet technology that's led to the acceptance of and popularity of distance education subsequent to those years that Roger referred to when we were very, very much at the margins. As a result of the technology, we've come into the mainstream. People like us would argue that we should have been in the mainstream as a matter of principle. I'm quite sure that distance education was a good thing 20, 25, 30 years ago, but that argument wasn't a popular argument. Then it's the technology that's brought us into the mainstream. Recently I looked at the data in the US, and the data speaks for themselves. Over a 5-year period in higher education, the delivery of programs online, great expansion. K-12, as we call it there, meaning children's education. And somebody was asking me a few days ago about the situation in the UK, to which I said I really don't know, but I have the impression that in the UK the delivery through online isn't as far accelerated as it is in the US. I could be wrong, but children's education taking up online delivery of programs very rapidly. The community colleges, adult education prior to university level, trying to define it crudely in that way, and very, very significantly the take-up of distance education methods in corporate training, with very, very large sums of money being invested in corporate training. The technologies in higher education in the US, 93% of institutions teaching via the internet, and other data there. The only maybe notable thing I think I would comment there is that if we had taken this kind of poll 10 years ago, the percentage using satellite delivered communications would have been very, very, very much higher, and that's been overtaken by the take-up in internet delivery. Oops. In the last 5 years, of course, and as we speak, the inclusion into the portfolio of technologies of the social networking technologies. The characteristic, as we all know, of these technologies being their interactive character, stimulating social networking. And at the present moment, refers back to that Sharples article which I opened, the current explosion in mobile learning and development of cloud-based services. Cisco just reported projected increase in mobile devices from 7.5 billion a year back to double that in the next 5 years, with, as yet, I think, unthought of implications, only conjectured, hypothesized implications for application in distance education. The effect of this on pedagogy, well, clearly moving from the assumptions of teaching in the information age to interaction, the shift of sources of assumed knowledge from school to greater emphasis on learners, and learning environments from what are being described as Snowden described as predictive to adaptive. Traditionally, learning environment, one in which outcomes are planned and predicted, to adaptive, which more learning is self-organized and collaborative. Refers back to the interactive technology, more learning created and distributed by learners themselves, obviously connecting to evolution in teaching theory, to constructivist views of learning and teaching. A substitution of what Snowden called from a fail-safe approach, which is one ensuring compliance safely with predictable outcomes, to safe-fail methods that encourage the interaction we refer to self-organization and enabling emergence rather than emergence of knowledge rather than control of predictable knowledge. With implications for changing of the role of the teacher from performer to conductor, the teacher more as a manager and sifter of information, providing form and structure to emerging knowledge, facilitating the search process, both individually and collaboratively. Those of us, and let me say in parentheses, for the last, I would say 5 or 6 years since teaching online became possible, I've been teaching online. My students have all been, my face-to-face students have all been doctoral students. We don't yet have doctoral studies online. I'm happy for some discussion. And as Roger said, they used to say to me 10, 15 years ago, Michael, we will never have master's degrees at a distance. Well, now at Penn State, 1/3 of all master's courses are taught online. So my teaching has been online for the last 5 years of master's students, and we may want to discuss the challenges for the teacher in attempting to facilitate and manage this more open-ended, searching, inductive approach to learning, and the challenge for that for the teacher. As I said here, linking and weaving ideas and information created by students, summarizing, pulling together threads, relating a particular experience to general theory. Didn't mean that to happen, but I do think I think there's an over-exuberance in what is said, what's promoted, what's in the literature with regard to the adaptive approach that I just referred to. I think, as our students tell us, social interaction is okay, but it's not an end in itself. My students, our students still want course content. Interaction is okay, but interaction with other students is valued and is okay, and when appropriately and skillfully used by a facilitator and instructor is extremely powerful way of facilitating learning. But students do continue to want interaction with an instructor. In fact, consider interaction with an instructor as more important ultimately than interaction with their peers. Interaction, yes, for years when we were accused of being behaviorist and too controlling and too structured, we attempted to develop more interaction, and interaction is desirable, as I've indicated, but having structure is also important. And so, the bottom line of this, again, something we can discuss, where the balance lies, but the bottom line is that both predictive and adaptive aspects of teaching have to be managed in appropriate combination. Appropriate, of course, varies from content to content, from group of student to group of students, from one student to another, which is part of the arc that goes with the science of teaching. Good teaching is good selection and good blending of those two different approaches. And I think I believe I got it in my conclusion that at the present time I feel that there's been a little too severe a swing of the pendulum in the direction that for years we advocated towards greater interaction and greater involvement of students. Now I fear that we're being a little too negligent of the value and importance of structure structure in design, and structure. So what's the problem? Well, educational institutions are still organized for traditional pedagogy. The challenge for institutions is to shift from what I and others refer to as a craft approach to teaching, to take advantage of the merits of a technology-based system. What I've shown here is part of the folklore of American education. It's the little red schoolhouse. It's a schoolhouse in which, in the 19th century, the children within walking distance came there. The one teacher was there, and the one teacher was the person who knew the content, who knew how to structure the lesson, who knew how to present the lesson, facilitate discussion if there was, who knew how to evaluate, who knew how to motivate, and so on and so on. It was, and indeed in most education it remains, and here is where one, I think, might criticize, it remains excessively a craft. And the challenge is, on the other hand, we do have highly interactive technologies, technologies that open the information database of the world to the student at the flick of a button, but we still have an excessively craft perspective on the role of the teacher. So the challenge is a shift towards taking advantage of what the technology can allow. That requires reorganizing human and capital resources. And if I said nothing else, I think we could stop there, because that gets to be the crux, I think, of most of our contemporary difficulty in obtaining a more effective, better quality, and lower cost higher education, let alone distance education. It requires a reorganizing of human and capital resources. A challenge to policymakers, one that in most countries has been avoided. It's been ducked time and time again in the United States. Now, in this country, you had policymakers, we had policymakers back in the late 60s, who did tackle it, that led to the establishment of British Open University. Of course, against the advice and good and well-meaning of many academics of the time. But in the US, we have not had policymakers prepared to take on this problem, this challenge. One of the few places where I've seen some attempt at this was in the Republic of South Africa back at the time, soon after the democratic election there. I was involved in this telematics for education initiative. It was one of the first projects funded by one of the World Bank funds. And what I'm showing you here is a summary of a document developed by the South African Ministry of Education at the time, indicating the policies on which traditional education was established, and indicating directions for change. Resources being allocated according to performance expectations that specify outcomes pertinent to the priorities of stakeholders. perhaps more critically, with faculty and staff not based on permanent positions, vertical divisions, and hierarchical relationships, which describes most of our university colleges and departments, but in teams that cut across vertical divisions for specific projects and allow for redeployment, which obviously has enormous political implications to reflect changing needs. Changes in allocation of funds from the traditional to what many of you will recognize because of your open university and related experiences, the different front-end investment, designing technology-based learning for amortization of costs over the lifetimes of programs, usually more than 12 months. Now, there have been attempts to accommodate some of that shift in policy, which I'm summarizing into two types, what I'm calling strategic alliances and virtual systems. It's the virtual systems that I'm excited about. The strategic alliances is the best we've been successful with so far. In a strategic alliance, the participants in a network of institutions contribute expertise and share the costs of developing new programs, share the cost and expertise in developing new programs across or between or collaborating among institutions. And a few of the examples I'm showing are American examples. I won't speak to each of them at any length. This first one has 11 institutions in the American Midwest that develop and deliver professional graduate programs that they reckon none of them could do effectively using their own resources. The other one, developing courses that none of them could justify individually. I noted here some exotic, say that, languages, and perhaps right here is also exotic next to SOAS, but Tibetan, Uzbek, and Zulu being taught in the US. There are not many people who want to learn Zulu in any one of these institutions, but by networking together, they're able to provide courses in subjects that would otherwise be viable. Some other examples, the one that marked ADEC is a consortium, a network of 65 universities focused on agricultural topics. In Illinois, which is the one on the top left, 72 colleges and universities in what they're calling the Illinois Virtual Campus. In 2009 enrolled 183,000 enrollments in 8,000 distance education courses. Internationally, there have been some similar attempts to network together, and I know I don't know anything of the detail. I understand that, not unsurprisingly, the University of London is involved in projects of this kind. One of these here is one MBA, 5 universities in 4 continents working together. And their website says you will learn from the faculty and students from all 5 partner schools. I think here there's considerable knowledge about the AVU, the Africa Virtual University. This began as a World Bank project. In fact, when I was working at the World Bank when the concept was first being developed. Now it's in about 30 countries with about 50 institutions in the network. They had a lot of problems at first, but I understand that many of those have been ironed out, and now their flagship program is a teacher education program with 10 African countries developing courses in math and science. An article in the journal that I publish, the American Journal of Distance Education, just a couple of years back, by persons working at the Commonwealth of Learning, reported on some of the strategic alliances in Commonwealth countries. And again, I know that at the University of London, some of these will be recognised and we'll know a bit about them. My understanding is that the Stamp 2000 in the late 90s had 140 course writers from 8 southern African countries. They wrote 46 modules for training school teachers, and that it was more or less a failure. That's not too strong a word, but it didn't work out as I understand it. The authors in the article showed that working together to construct content isn't enough. There has to be greater political and other collaboration and liaison at the point of delivery, if I can put it that way. Building on it was the teacher education in sub-Saharan Africa, which, in which the UK Open University played a major part, and as a result of their leadership, my understanding is it was a much more successful collaboration. In the CCNC, as I mentioned there, 1, 2, 3, 5 or 6 modules were developed by academics in 5 or 6 different countries. And the article reporting on the failure of some of these and not great success in general of these Commonwealth of Learning alliances concluded, in spite of the strength of the community to self-organize, there was need to put in place a governance structure that would steer the project and monitor progress. They said that the traditional governance structures of most educational institutions that were collaborating conflicts, this is their words, conflicts with the decentralized approach needed in the network, or in, as they said, open approaches. Thus, open, they said, must be perceived not merely from a technological dimension, but also from a governance dimension. It's not enough for success to simply link traditional institutions. And here, in my notes, I put this in quotation, in italics, a more revolutionary form of organizational structure is called for. So we come back time and time again to technologies can connect, people may know how to facilitate interactive learning, but at the end of the day, you hit a wall when you come up against traditional organizational structures. Which is the other model, and I'll be moving towards an end in 5 or 10 minutes, which leads to the other model, which, borrowing from, I don't remember his name now, but a management guru I referred to as a disaggregation model. It's a theoretical model of an organizational structure that's been around for a few years now, and even tested in one national project that I'm going to refer to in a moment. It's really leading towards a virtual organization, using the term virtual to underline the fact that there isn't any one institution to design and deliver programs, but neither is this a voluntary collaboration like the other cases that I've discussed until now, but a system that frankly has most of the elements that we would associate with an open university. A system that designs and delivers learning programs by commissioning the component processes from any and all available agencies. The concept being that in a state or nation, you can draw on the best resources wherever they're located to build a network of all those parts that you traditionally now associate with the distance education system, and configure a mixture for a particular program, which harks back to that South Africa policy that I referred to. bring together the mixture you need for a particular program or project on a flexible and open mixing and matching basis. This is horribly, it's a horrible slide, I know. But it's really indicating those pieces that, as I said, we're familiar with in any higher education institution, I guess, and certainly in a distance education system, having a unit for planning and evaluation, having content specialists, having a unit for software development, having learner support unit, having learner support, having training, having coordination at regional levels, and so on, is a pretty map of a pretty conventional single mode, not the kind of place I teach in, which is a dual mode institution, but a conventional single mode, such as a UK Open University system. But the virtual disaggregation model is arguing that these need not, indeed should not, belong to any one institution. That there are no permanent staff of designers or content experts, but these functions are carried out by temporarily contracted individuals and agencies. The only staff consisting of a management unit or a directorate, call it what you will, or overseeing the contracted resources. The blue network icons there indicate that these functions might be operated virtually by dispersed specialists, whether the internal management or the external content design, development, and implementation resources. So no course or program need be developed by a single institution, which is of course different from conventional practice. For a course, the content specialist could be in 3 or 4 different institutions, the software specialist in 3 or 4 others, and the learner support in 100 of others. Now, the one case that I personally was involved in, I think was successful, thank God, because when we finish, I'm going to mention 3 or 4 others, all of which failed for one reason or another, but usually for one reason, as I'll indicate. This particular project in Brazil, called Proformación, which means professional training of teachers, in-service teachers, was a project of the Brazilian Ministry of Education, a national project, and the problem was the initial professional training of large numbers of school teachers who, as in most less developed countries, had no professional training. In Brazil at that time, 16% of the 2.5 million school teachers were not qualified, and amounting to a total of 72,000 unqualified teachers. So applying the pieces I showed a moment ago to the development of a virtual system, of a disaggregated system, if I stay with that term, that is a map, a model of the system that was developed with considerable success, with the content people being brought from universities 1, 2, 3, etc. Video producers being brought from several different television companies, software from other places, several publishers, with learner support being provided by local colleges, and well, the system put together in that way. The result of it all, apart from some greater detail than you want to take right now, with 3,200 hours of training in 8 subjects, 27,000 trainees in the first year, 85% success rate, Total cost 30 million US dollars, large amount, but amortized over the cost of a large number of trainees, total cost of about $1,000 US for a 2-year course, considerably less expensive than a traditional training course, but a traditional training course, of course, quite impossible for school teachers in rural areas who would not be able to get off teaching in school to attend a course even if one could be provided at that cost. So, a successful project with only at the national level a small team of coordinators to facilitate the process, and concluding that the success was due, and one might therefore put this as hypotheses for the development of a virtual system of that kind. The technology was appropriate to the trainees' conditions, not quite relevant for today's discussion. I can go into it if you want, but obviously not all high technology was available at village level. So design was of world-class content, because you had the best of the best in the country, and that's a big and sophisticated country, although like most of the BRIC countries, I suppose, has high sophisticated first world as well as a much less sophisticated third world, but the best of the resources available, sophisticated quality delivery system, but most significantly an adequate investment, major investment, and most significant of all, political leadership. In the case of Brazil, national leadership from the President, Minister of Education downwards, providing the political support for the allocation of the funds. Last summer I was in Norway and got involved in a discussion of the development of a virtual system somewhat on those lines in that country, based on the 43 study centres in 74 municipalities and 7 university campuses in that country. And that would be the same map as we developed it for Norway. So, concluding thoughts. Having the new technology and knowing how to use it pedagogically, and I think we do know how to use it pedagogically, although, let me say what I say very often, there is much more bad distance education going on than there is good. There's a lot of bad teaching going on in the name of distance education, but from our practice and our research, we do know how to facilitate that kind of learner-centered, interactive, constructivist, through networking approach to the development of learning. We know how to do that, but it's insufficient without changing the organizational structures. Social networking technologies have added minimally to quality and access to distance education. This morning coming down on the train, did I press that? Coming down on the train, the Times has a little story about how far we've come with the technology. It says, feeling nostalgic. It's talking about changing the internet. But more interestingly, student law, what are the best apps? What are the best apps for teaching in student law? I suggest to you that so far the social networking technologies haven't really added very much. We've got a long way to go in catching up in our teaching with the technology. Attention to social networking technologies has been counterproductive by distracting from training in and study of fundamentals of distance teaching. And my earlier point that I think there's still place for structure and traditional aspects of distance education. We mustn't throw out the proverbial baby with the bathwater. I think there's so much talk in newcomers to the field about the social networking has actually been somewhat counterproductive, especially neglecting of systematic course design and, a little bug of my own, neglecting high production value video presentations. Think back to when the Open University started, and the wonderful quality of the material that was put out on television. And on its own, that isn't enough for good instruction, but when linked together with the kind of discussions that we organised in tutorial groups, or that now can be organised online, powerful, but we've got the networking online, but we've thrown out the high production value video, which I personally think is a great loss. Attention to social networking technologies has been counterproductive by reinforcing traditional classroom methodology, and especially by distracting attention from individualized independent study. There's a whole tradition, a whole history, a whole philosophy of the autonomous learner, the individual learner. That's where distance education started, really, was independent learning. And if you look back to the Dewey quote, it makes reference to the importance of helping develop the self-directed person, the self-managed person. So I think we've become now too excited about what is essentially a classroom model. Attention to social networking technologies has been counterproductive by distracting from evolving new organizational structures. In my university and in the university in the US, I see the tendency is to say, yes, well, we've got distance education. We've got our traditional faculties, our colleges, our departments, and we give them computers, and they can emulate traditional classrooms with a lot of traditional classroom values, and so we don't really need to disassemble a lot of the human and other resources available, or change our budgeting practices into new ways, because now we've got distance education without really making any great change in the way that we're organized. In all cases where advanced virtual systems models have been attempted, they have been restricted or stifled by opposition from established institutions. Examples? Well, Brazil, that was a great success, but they didn't take it any further. The model, and when I was at World Bank, our discussions in-house were to make this, put this out to make it work, and then on the basis of that, we'll have a model for the further evolution, or supporting and encouraging further evolution of more progressive forms of higher education within the country. Well, the institutions established in the country kind of put the squeeze on that, and it never really developed in that way. In the Republic of South Africa, the same. I was part of, as other people around here were part of the consulting for the African National Congress back in the mid-1960s, and the wonderful opportunity then to pull into the pool the human and technical and financial resources and look to more effective ways of using the educational dollar, as we say in the US. Progress was definitely made, but it fell short. Again, I think under the pressure from established institutions. In the USA, we had proposals for an open university in mid-America back in the 60s, I guess it was. At the University of Wisconsin, I was with Charles Wedemeyer, just he and me, when we went to the governor advocating a plan which people had developed for about 6 months for what was called, it's in the literature, an open school, and the phones were ringing off the hook from the university to put an end to that, because it was seen as competing with University of Wisconsin Extension, their outreach program. I was part of developing a state plan for the state of Florida, and again the same thing happened. The phones rang off the hook from local colleges that said, why are we not getting part of this $30 million that you're proposing to put into a virtual system? So to effect super-institutional organization that comes up above the level of individual institutions, I mean, today I've been talking about institutions collaborating. Thank God they do that, that's progress. But to get up to another level with the benefits of specialization, economies, and equality, the national policies are required. National policies are required And it seems to me that most likely they have to be externally imposed. Whether and when and how it will happen, I don't know. Governments and policymakers, I'm suggesting, are intimidated or distracted by institutional interest. And I just finally, if I can find this bit again from this morning's Times, this is in the business section, they're talking about force end of free current accounts, says top banker. And it says, he's arguing they should go further, saying that outside interference from policymakers may be necessary to force the banks to change. You can't say to the banks, you really need to get together and organise things differently. Outside interference from policymakers may be necessary. It won't happen. In truth, this is not something that will happen spontaneously, he is due to say in a speech to the Westminster Business Forum. It is hard for a single bank, university, to break out of the existing situation without, it goes on to talk more about banking. So when I read that this morning, I thought, that's really what I want to argue is our dilemma, or our challenge, or our opportunity with regard to distance education in our universities at the present time. I hope that gives something to chew on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael.